Welcome to this edition of the Suitcase Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Bob Bowman. Today, we're talking to Mike Breedlove of MGB Guitars. Mike's located in Tampa, Florida, and is in a different time zone, so we're happy to have him on this evening. So, for the next few minutes, let's find a place in the shade, set down our suitcase and cigar box guitar, and enjoy the show. Well, Mike, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. I know that you are in a different time zone, and I do appreciate your time. You're a busy man. So I thought our listeners would want to know a little bit more about you. So why don't we start there? And how about maybe you give us a little bit of an idea of, who you are and maybe those things that you would like folks to know.
Well, thank you, Bob. And I do really appreciate being the first person to be on this new exciting venue that you've got going. So I'm truly honored and really do appreciate that. My name is Mike Breedlove. I do live in a little town called Odessa, a little bit north of Tampa. Born and raised in St. Louis, and this is kind of interesting because we got a lot of parallels between you and me. We didn't get to know each other till late in life, but we actually grew up pretty close together. Of course, I'm a little bit older than you, but we both grew up in North St. Louis, and so we were kind of running around together and didn't even know it. And later on in life, we met, and that's been great. It's been a real pleasure. There's some other similarities that you and I have is we both started off loving woodworking, both have families, both have grandkids, both love this hobby. So it's been great. And again, I do appreciate you letting me be part of this.
Well, you're welcome, and I appreciate your time. So, okay. So I think I would like to know is how you first, came to know or hear about or see or come across the cigar box guitar itself.
Yeah. Give you a little bit of a background. Like you, I've been a woodworker all my life. My very first experience was I was watching my father make stuff there in North St. Louis. But I took my first shop class in Kirby Junior High, there off of Highway 270. And it was an interesting time. Hazelwood School District was just exploding. And we had the industrial arts section. And I took up woodworking and I did it. My dad helped me a little bit, and I just had a lot of fun. And it was at that point that I really realized I like working with wood. And I tell people even today that I've got about a 60-year love affair with wood. I've been making stuff all my life, not only building stuff, furniture and this and that. I've also done a lot of restoration of antiques, and I just like working with wood. So that's kind of how I got started. And I used to just make all kinds of stuff. I got a pretty full shop here with lasers and CNC routers and bandsaws, table saws, sanders, and everything. And so I was making a lot of stuff. And I would make stuff, and people would say it was kind of nice, but nobody got excited about it. And then in 2009, I was stumbling around on the internet like a lot of people do, and I saw a cigar box guitar. I saw it. And I thought, well, that's really cool. I've never seen one of those before, and that looks like fun. I'm going to do it. And so I took off. And of course, that was the internet days. And so you could look around. I learned a little bit. I found out about them, found out how to make them. And I took off down that path and I made it. And I've still got it here. It's number one. It's sitting over here. And it was really a disaster. It was pretty poor. I'm not too proud of it, but I do hang on to it. And I use it when I talk to people, say, this is where I started. But I went ahead and built one. And what happened, which is so interesting, and I share this a lot with other people who are builders because I think it's a point of encouragement. When I showed that around, people got excited. They went crazy. No one ever went crazy about anything else I saw, but when they saw a cigar box guitar, there was, Mike, can you make me one? Mike, can you make one for my brother? And I thought, there's something here. There might be an opportunity. And so I built more of them, enjoyed it, and started looking for more parts. I was making some parts. I was buying some parts. I was, just getting my own set of parts. And then I was traveling to China a lot that time for my job. And so I would find the towns and stuff that had the factories. And so I started buying parts. And next thing you know, I'm in business. And it's just kind of taken off since then, which is really odd because I kind of started the business about 7 years ago after I was 60. And another thing that's kind of interesting is, and I'm not afraid to tell people, I don't know how to play a guitar. I don't know how to play. I used to say I can't play a note, but in reality, if you can pluck a string, you played a note. So I can't play more than one or two notes. but I don't know how to play. So that's been fun. But I do like to say, and I hope I'm not rambling on too much for you, Bob. If I am, just yell. I'll stop. But I do like to tell people that the neat thing about Cigar Box guitars, is that they're largely scientific and mathematical devices. And that's what you really need to understand. There's some art in them, there's woodworking in them, but stuff like the fret distance and the scale length and all that, that's pure science and math, and you just got to be pretty good at that. And I'm kind of halfway decent, so.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you bring that up, because when I got started, I was also in the North County area, as you point out, in Hazelwood School District, which was an interesting nexus we share. But I was in the 7th grade when I first took my woodshop class, and back then they offered it. And Mr. Morgan, what happened to switch when I left junior high up to senior high, he became our shop teacher there. But he always encouraged us to draw our projects out. And so I became a draftsman as a result of getting kicked out of wood shop, because I got kicked out because they said, Bob, you've taken, 4 years of wood shop in each semester. You need to give the other students an opportunity. Back then there was 4,500 students in Hazelwood Central where I was taking that wood shop. So anyway, I like that detail. As a draftsman, I draw out all my builds. I put things to scale. And so when I came across the Cigar Box guitar, and I still have my first one here off camera as well, like yours, probably a disaster in terms of what we're making now. But what I loved was all of those details, the action or the string height. I loved the thought of, okay, well, there's some knowns, some finite knowns. That's scale, length, the width of the neck, and what size box you had to use. But then the thought of putting that all together and having it make notes was great. I had hoped the box would teach me how to play. I don't know how to play either. So we also share that, it turns out.
Well, you play a little more than I do. I know that.
Yeah, well, at any rate, I appreciated that comment about the detail. So what part of the science do you like when you're thinking about these? I know you like the scientific aspect.
Yeah.
You pointed that out, but what intrigues you the most about those scientific pieces?
I think the one thing that has interested me the most is that if you think about music and you think about a note, and you think about sound, where when the string is plucked, it's vibrating and it's moving your ear and you're picking it up, it's fairly precise, and it's a very large number. It's like 440 hertz is A, and it's got to be pretty close to that to be an A, or it's some other note. So that's kind of interesting. The system of using frets, the system of using a specific string, the making it a certain tension by using the tuner. You can get it tuned to a certain note, and then as you go down the frets, that makes the different notes. And I don't know what I thought before. I had no idea what frets were, how they work, but since then I've kind of learned how that's worked. I mean, it's kind of like, and I explained it to a lot of people. Everybody at one point in their life has peered into a grand piano that's open, the top's open, and you see all of the strings. There's like on most pianos, I think there's 88 keys. Well, each one of those strings, and sometimes it's a combination of strings, is a note. Well, you couldn't play a guitar with 88 strings on it. So right. It's kind of a method of having a number of strings, 6, 3, 4, whatever, and then the frets, and that's how you change it. Now, you can't get as many notes as you could on a piano, but you can get a lot more than just the 6 strings. So that's been an enjoyable part. And then the other thing that has helped out a lot is understanding the geometry of it. There's kind of a geometry. The critical factor on getting an instrument to play well is the action height, the difference between the strings and the fretboard. And then there's kind of a geometry of how that all works together, and you keep it flat, because if the frets are too high, then you push them and you're bending the strings and the notes go flat. So that's interesting, the geometry of it. And then, of course, I have an electrical background. I've been in the electrical industry designing stuff and understanding that for a long time. So I kind of enjoy the electronics part of it, pickups, making pickups, designing pickups, and then, putting them together with pots and capacitors and stuff like that, and switches and stuff like that, to get it to make the sound. And that's been a real pleasure. Just I never knew how a pickup worked, but I do now. I kind of dove into it and kind of figured it out.
It's funny the rabbit holes we go down when
Yeah, it is.
our interest is
Yeah,
sparked on some component of the cigar box
yeah,
itself. You mentioned that you have all the shop tools, of course, that a woodworker would have, but you mentioned that you have CNCs and
hmm
lasers. How does that fit into that same thought process for you, or are those a result of that thought process of yours, wanting things to be so precise or exact?
yeah. So, you know, uh, with a CNC, and again, this was long before I ever got into cigar box guitar. CNC brings a level of precision machining to wood, so you can do a lot of stuff. I mean, you can take off with a table saw and a sander, and you can kind of get close. Well, with a router, you can get down to the thousands. So if you want to make a part that's exactly the size, you can make it, and that's really helpful to be able to make precise parts. I've been able to take that technology and that experience and kind of move it into what I'm doing in the CNC. So I have in the past made necks on my CNC. Sometimes I make boxes on the CNC. Sometimes I cut openings for the pickups on a CNC. So it's just a level of precision, and that's kind of critical and it's helpful. You can still do a lot without all those tools. There's a lot of people building them, and you certainly can, and you don't have to have that kind of technology, but it kind of helps. And then for me, a lot of it is also a lot of the parts, more so with a laser than with the CNC. A lot of the parts I make here, I literally just put wood into the laser and press a button, and it'll cut out 10 or 20 or 30 of them. And, so I can do production of parts because I try to make as much as I can here in the U.S., right here in the shop in Odessa.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I appreciate that insight too. Um, okay, so one of the things I was curious about, is if you had any, um, what are your motivations for being in the cigar box guitar? I mean, you are constantly building. Every time I log into any of the forums online, you've got a new build. So I know, aside from the whole science and aside from the precision, you definitely seem to appreciate the art form for the art itself. So what are some of your motivations?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. The title is Crossroads, and I know the crossroads, what it means for you and me and stuff. But my crossroads also have kind of a couple of more crossroads in there. So it's like, it's almost like a figure eight or something, all these things coming together. Some of my motivations are I have always not only always been interested in woodworking, but I've always been interested in history. And a lot of my stuff that I've collected over the years, as a matter of fact, you can see over my right shoulder there, you can see an antique fan. I started in the 80s collecting antique fans because, one, they were old, and two, they were electrical, and I knew how to fix the electrical stuff. And so I started that, and I started a group. We have about 800 members around the world that collect antique fans. And I started a museum in the late 90s, and there's actually a museum for antique fans in Indianapolis for fans. So I had that whole history. And one of the things I really like, and I think some of you have seen it, it's certainly on my website, but I also collect the old antique cigar box guitars. I've got a collection of about 80 of them. This is one in particular. I just like to be connected to the past. Now, I'll have to kind of bridge that into what's that motivation for me today. But I just like it. I love these old instruments. This is one. I don't know how old this is. I imagine about 1900s or something. It's a beautiful instrument. If you could look at it real closely, you could see the fretboard is faceted. It looks like somebody literally did it with a pocket knife. You can look at the holes, and they chiseled out the holes. But then the most interesting thing is on the back of this, they painted the Gadsden flag on there. So this is a real exciting thing for me, is to look back on the history and collect that stuff. Bill Jaley, who is an expert on this and done a lot of research, is a good friend, and I love to learn about the history. I love to think about the fact that I'm doing stuff with a CNC in an air conditioned shop, designing it on my computer and stuff. And there are people who were doing building instruments 100 years ago, 120, 130 years ago, that probably did it with a pocket knife on a kitchen table underneath a kerosene lamp. And so that's just this real neat thing for me to think about the past and move into the future. And I've got samples of all the periods in between. So that's kind of a motivation for me to be part of that history and keep it going. But also the big thing, and I talk with a lot of people about this, I'm not a player. I don't know how to play guitar. But like everybody else, I've heard music all my life, whether it was in church, at a concert, I've heard music. And I always admired it. And of course, all the musicians got all the good looking girls. They have them all flocking to them, and they're the popular ones, you know. Right. And I could never do that because I couldn't play. The closest I can get to it now is I can build an instrument that somebody else can play. That's kind of exciting. It's really been a real joy and a pleasure to be able to do that, to make an instrument. I'll never forget the day I got done with my first guitar, and I plugged it in and I plucked a string and a sound came out. I was like, I wasn't ready for this. I didn't expect this. It literally happens. It works. So that's kind of exciting. And I've had opportunities to work with a lot of different artists and guys who play all the time. And, you know, I strive to build something that's worthy of their time that they can play. So those are the motivations for me. And then it still gets back to, I just like to make stuff. Through my life, I've always been a doer and like to make stuff and do stuff. And so, you know, and I'm thinking now, I've got here in my shop, I've got 3 or 4 radical ideas I'm kind of working on that I'll keep moving on. So,
well, that's interesting. So, and another thought I had as you're talking about, you know, reflecting on the possibility that under a kerosene lamp with a pocket knife, someone was building or creating that what I would consider work of art out of that piece of wood and a cigar box, because I know that the tuners on that were wooden as well. I guess something that I'd be curious about is, what are your favorite woods to work with? Given you like wood so much, is there a favorite? I know that in the cigar box guitar realm, we know what the standards are. Most of us who are builders know what the standards are, but what's your favorite woods to work with?
Can you excuse me for a second while I go grab it?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I should have had this prop set up. Been a woodworker all my life, much like you. And one of the things about woodworkers is there's a truth that if you're a woodworker, you're a wood collector. And out of my shop, I've got a bunch. I've bought a lot of wood for a lot of projects that never turned into anything. And other people give me woods. And so I've got a lot of the exotics, a lot of the hardwoods, a lot of rosewoods and ambonia burl and stuff that is just really exotic wood. And I love it all. But I kind of have over time really settled into one favorite, and it's kind of an American favorite of mine, and that is quarter sawn oak. There was a period of time when I was doing stuff in my woodworking career, probably in my 20s or 30s, I got into antique restoration. And I would buy all this antique oak and I'd take it home. And so I learned about quarter sawn oak and the medullary rays. And I just like that. That look appeals to me. It's what your grandmother's furniture would be like. It's not very popular anymore. Not many people collect it, but there was a time when it was the thing to collect. So I would say quarter sawn oak is my favorite. Most all of it came from the U.S. As we all know, there was a time in our country when it was literally just a forest everywhere, and the Industrial Revolution kind of took all the wood out, and a lot of it turned into furniture. It's so crazy they talk about oak. There was a time when they would make this furniture, and I forget the name of the soap company, but there was a soap company that if you bought the soap from them, the premium was they give you a piece of furniture made from quarter sawn oak because it was so cheap. So that's kind of interesting. But I guess my favorite wood is traditionally always been quarter sawn oak, and I just like it. And I found this box. And it was a file card box, and I turned it into kind of a guitar. So that's it. Yeah.
So that piece was something prior to taking on a new life as an instrument.
Yeah.
I think it's another thing I definitely like about the cigar box guitar art form is we're taking this cigar box that originally held cigars, and we're turning it into an instrument instead of watching it go into a landfill or burned or whatever they do with them.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that point.
Yeah, and that's a real neat thing about our hobby is that one of the key components that we need, we can almost get for nothing. Everybody who's got them has a friend who said, Bob, you build Cigar Box, and I found this at my dad's place, and here it's yours. And then there's some unbelievable ones. The cigar boxes that are created now in the market are works of art. I mean, they're highly finished. They're just beautiful works of art. And you can't always sneak up on them, but you can get some pretty nice boxes. And if you were to make that box for a guitar and make a body, you'd spend weeks and several $100s. Well, you can just walk into a Cigar Box and got this cool box, and you can turn it into an instrument. So that's one of the cool things about this hobby is you get a lot of your materials for nothing.
Yeah, and I think about how they cost next to nothing and what the result is. And for me, I love the cigar box itself as much as I love turning them into guitars. So you'll relate to this, I know, because of your business, but I must have 500-600 cigar boxes. I know on my second floor, I fill a closet and they're all in rose boxes. I go to my local grocer and I get the long boxes. Roses are shipped in and they give them to me. Mm-hmm. And so I'll line those with cigar boxes by type. And then I have them out in my garage. I have them in my shop. I have them in the basement. And, at some point, the fact that they are so inexpensive is a problem. It's nothing worse than having time and money on your hands in this business.
Yeah. And one of the things, I know you've already commented on it, but, in life, there's a lot of rabbit trails that you can go down. You can go this way, you can go that way, and you just go down this rabbit trail. And you and I have talked at great length about cigar boxes, but there's a whole history there. It's amazing. I mean, I don't remember the year, maybe you will, but there was a time when literally cigars were made by the billions. And there's a whole story. And this is, again, a box. This is a cigar box. Probably, I think you and I dated about 1895. It's unbelievable. The art going back at that time is just fabulous. So the rabbit trail is, and I'm kind of a sort of a hoarder, collector kind of guy, and like in the history. So there's always a temptation to run down that path and start collecting them. But like you, I've got way, way too many boxes around here. So.
Right. I think, I did have, sitting here, a fact based on that, because I actually have done an episode that'll you can listen to later relative to the history of the cigar box. And it was estimated that, and Tony Hyman pointed this out, and as you know, Tony Hyman wrote a definitive book on cigar box history, the history of the cigar box itself. But he said that between 1800 and 1960, a conservative estimate of boxes in circulation were at about 8 billion. and another 2 billion out of all the other materials, whether that, happened to be metal or glass or you name the material, they were out there. And so it's funny to me that most people who I talk to, either, that I work with or they come across in the community, they think, oh, I've got this antique cigar box, and they'll show me a cardboard box, and I'll think, okay, well, I don't know what your definition of antique is, but most boxes are wood, and they're pretty nice works of art, as you pointed out. You can't build a very good cigar box guitar out of a cardboard one. Yeah.
One thing I always point out too, there's a place I frequent here, and I get a lot of boxes from, and they know me. And as a matter of fact, I'm on speed dial. When their bin gets full, they call me and I come get them. But I don't do it too much anymore because I got so many. But one of the guys came up to me and says, "Hey, Mike, they just told us here that 70% of the decisions on what cigars to buy is based upon the box itself." And so that's why you see these boxes that are fabulous work of art. People look at it and say, well, if the box is that nice, must be a really nice cigar. So that's kind of always an interesting thing to keep in mind. But boy, there's some beautiful boxes out there. And the good thing about it, the cool thing about it is that's part of a merchandising. Now, there are some companies who have the same cigar box, like Padrones, have been that way for a very long time, but it's part of a marketing campaign. And so there's always some fresh new look of a box with some really cool piece of art on it or some different color, some different shape. And so I see people that scamble it. They want to be the first to do it with this box. And so everybody scambles and does it. And then the boxes are plentiful and they show up everywhere. And then over time, they just slowly go away. You'll never see them. So, there's some boxes I used to use that I really liked. They were like 2012 or 2013. I never see them anymore. So they come and go.
Well, that's a great point. What is your favorite cigar box? Do you have one?
Yeah, I don't have it out here. Yeah, well, the two things. I mean, it's the old saying that my favorite one was my last one. My best one's my next one. I mean, it's that old story. I do have one, and if I'd have known you to wanted me to do that, I guess I should have. I've got one that I built like in 1912. It's or 2012. It's a pretty cool box with a pretty cool graphic on it, and it was in my early ages, and I just stumbled into making it kind of cool, and it's always kind of hung around as a favorite. It's got a scorpion on it. It's pretty much a standard one. It's really cool. So yeah, but they're a lot of fun and a lot of pleasure, and we really enjoy it. So,
well, pretty cool. So you're talking about pleasure and enjoying it. So I have two questions for you that I'd be interested in finding out. Relative to building the Cigar Box guitars, what's your favorite aspect? What do you enjoy the most as a part of the build itself? Is there a part of the build that you like better than others?
Yeah, so I kind of I'm like a lot of people, and you see it as I'm trying to do something really unusual or something different. One of the things I like to do is I like to try kind of new ideas or new ways of making things. And of course, with my business, I'm always looking for new parts. One of the big things, because the next question I know is going to be, what part do you like the least? And I solved that problem a long, long time ago. And the thing I liked the least was making the necks. One, because I'm a very impatient person. But the first 5 or so cigar box guitars, I made the necks, and I was making them, and it was like, geez, this is a multi-day process, and it takes time, and it's sanding, and it's this, and before you know it, you can wind up with 10 hours in the neck. And I kind of said, I don't really want to do this. So at that point, I found somebody to make my necks for me. So that made that stuff easy. And then when I started up the company, I began designing necks and coming up with necks and finding factories to make the necks. So I get those necks made. And so I enjoy part of the process where I'm coming up with a new neck design, and I do a little bit of testing, get a prototype. But the important thing is to build one, to build an actual prototype that has a neck that I came up with and see it works, and then give it to somebody who plays, and it plays. So that's a real enjoyment for me, is coming up with new parts. And I try to sit around here and design new sound hole covers and new thises and that's, and try and come up with new stuff. So that's very enjoyable. And that's why it's kind of a fun thing about having a business. It's the business dictates that I have to do a lot of builds, and I do a lot of builds, and so I enjoy it. Then trying to get rid of them is another story, but that's fun.
Yeah, well, we all become collectors, I suppose.
Yeah.
The guitar.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a good background on some of the personal insights you bring to this interview, certainly, but relative to the cigar box itself, how you came to know it, and your love for antiques and history and woods and just the art form itself. But I think what I'd like to know is now shifting gears a little bit. I'd like to talk to the owner of MGB Guitars for a second. So if you could put that hat on for a minute. We touched on that last point. Your least favorite part of a build is the neck. So you found a way to not have to worry about that by finding someone to produce those necks. You like the innovations, and that makes sense to me, knowing what your shop looks like. So I think my question now is, well, how are you supporting the traditional builder? And, what questions do you feel the most from them? Because a lot of people, they like to spend 3 days on the neck, or they'll make or there's whole communities out there that just like fretless. Yep. And so my question is, how are you supporting those traditional builders as a, parts and supplier?
Yeah. So the big thing is I try and have a wide assortment of parts, and it's kind of like whatever you want to do, I got the parts. One of the things I've learned over time is I've done enough of this, and I deal with enough people, and I probably I would say I talk to 20 builders a week, on a regular basis. And a lot of them have that first time new guy experience and they're excited. And so I see a little bit of a process. I'll typically see an evolution. The first thing is a box and a stick and a string. And then it's a box, a stick and a string and a piezo to get the sound. And then after they do that a bit, then they want to go to more strings, and then they want to go to electric pickups, and then they want it to look a little better. So you see kind of just an evolution. But I still sell the basic stuff. I still piezo parts. I don't sell. I used to sell the basic board necks, and I couldn't do it because a guy could run down to Home Depot or Lowe's and go to their wood rack and pick off a piece of 2-inch material and go home and cut it. And I can't ship it to him. I can't cut it and process it. So I don't do the low end necks, but everything else I do. And the strings are the strings, no matter whether it's a high end build or a low end build, you got to use the strings. Tuners, there's all kinds of ideas on tuners, but using a typical tuner with a worm gear is about the best way to tighten up a string and keep it in tune. So I guess I say my answer is I got a little bit of everything for everybody, but I try to keep everybody happy.
Well, what questions do those new builders ask the most? What's the question you field the most from those new builders, do you think?
I think the biggest question I usually get has to do with the strings, has to do with the spacing of the frets, so I sell a lot of fret templates and frets, but I'd say a lot of it has to do with the geometry. Again, the box is here, and does the neck go up like this or go down like this, and what does that action height have to be and stuff like that. So I would say those are kind of the basic questions that I get most of the time.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into it, one of the toughest concepts to understand was this whole back angle on the neck through, piece. So I can appreciate that. So with that said, then, what are some of the misconceptions with a cigar box guitar do you find yourself explaining to folks, or are there any?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I think the problem that most people run into that they don't expect is the amount of tension that can be created when you crank up 3 strings. And then if you make it 4 strings, it's about 33% more. That there's a real tendency. I tell people it's like we're all familiar with the come-alongs where you crank it and you can pull, stuff together. When you're tightening up that tuner, it's like a come-along that is actually trying to take that guitar and fold it in half. And if it's not stiff enough, it'll bend them, or you'll bend the neck and stuff like that. So that's usually the problem that I run into most with people, is that they've underestimated how much tension there is with 3 strings or 4 strings, and they build an X too light, and it's actually building. I get people say, can I use pine? I got some pine. No, you can't use pine. It's a softwood and it will bend. Can I use oak? Oak is typically pretty stiff and pretty stout and it'll work. Then it's a matter of the geometry. If it's thick enough, it will work for sure. But that tends to be the biggest problem. And then getting into electronics, that's a whole nother issue. Getting into strings, that's a whole nother set of issues. But the necks are usually the biggest issue.
Yeah, and you mentioned the string tension, and I know you have a guide that you like to share. At least I've seen it online, relative to the different types of cigar box guitars. Behind me, I have a mandolin over my shoulder, and that's probably, outside of a bass, the only one you would need a truss rod for. But based on the string tension, if you're using a solid hardwood, as you're suggesting. But I think that's something that I hear a lot relative to that misconception piece, is folks who played a 6-string guitar, grew up playing an acoustic guitar and want to discover making their own guitars with a cigar box. They all think they need a truss rod, and they don't.
Yeah, not on a 3 and 4 string, you don't. But
No,
six, and certainly mandolin, that's incredible with 8 strings there.
right.
One thing, talking about as far as a misconception, I'm glad you mentioned the acoustic because, as a matter of fact, I had a call today on the topic. And when you're in electric guitars, cigar boxes, you can make them sound really, really good. What I generally tell people is have some really low expectations if you want to build something that's acoustic. All of us have seen the big acoustic dreadnoughts and their monstrous boxes and a lot of surface area and stuff like that. And you strum them and they put out a great noise. Well, you take that down to something little like a little cigar box and you're not going to get much sound at all. So you're going to be disappointed. So that's a big misconception. I have to tell people, you can make a cigar box guitar sound really good if it's electric. It can get pretty close to putting out the kind of volume that a regular electric guitar have, but you'll never get that way with an acoustic. It's just not going to happen. You can still have it as long as you're willing to play it at the kitchen table and the 4 people that are sitting at the table with you can all hear it from there, but it's not going to go across the room. So that's a big misconception.
Yeah, that's true. And I found that one of the boxes that's probably the plainest looking, much like a Padron, but is my personal favorite to build with, is a punch box. They are very loud acoustically without a piezo or anything else in it. So if you're just sitting around on the porch noodling around type of playing, that seems to really ring fairly loud without those in it. But okay, so a question I had, because you talked earlier about your love for the innovations, your electrical background. I think you didn't mention it, but you used to, your career was in lighting in some form or fashion and design. And you talked about learning all that you could and designing your own pickups. How do you pair a pickup with a cigar box? Or is there a process in your mind for what pickup works best with a build or a box? Do you have a pairing process that mentally you go through?
No, not really. And this is another really important part about building. And it's something I have to deal with people all the time. What I tell people to be a good builder is a process. And don't come in expecting to build the very best guitar your first time out. I get this all the time. People, I'll literally get somebody, hey, I want to build a cigar box guitar and I want it to sound like my Les Paul something that I spent $3,500 for. Not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Right. And it's also, I have to encourage people. I say, look, if you want to get into this, you kind of got to, it's okay if you just want to do a one-off, be done with it and stick it in the corner and you're fine. But if you want to kind of make this a hobby and do it on a regular basis, be ready to go through a process because they're all different. And even with the pickups, I can tell you, like my flat pups are probably the most ideal average pickup from a performance and value standpoint and ease of use. That's the best way to go. But you got to learn. And I'll get people, this is another phenomenon I run into. People will say, well, I've got this guitar that I just built and I use this pickup, I use this box, I use this neck and stuff like that. Now I want to switch and I'm going to do this, this, and this. What's it going to sound like? And I had to say, I have no idea. I really have no idea. If you think about all of the guitars, all of the guitars that like Fender has built over the years, and some of those models they've made into the millions probably. They've made them so many times, they know exactly what's going to happen. And if somebody says, let's change this screw, they're going to say, no, we're not going to change that screw because the screw that was in there worked for so long. And so I tell people, it's an evolution. And if you want to change, yeah, do it. But I can't forecast that if you change the box, you use this kind of box and this pickup and this and this and this, and these strings, I can't tell you how it's going to sound. It'll make noise, it'll be good, but it's a process. And so I have to encourage people a lot of times. You got to do this a lot of times, and it's still a learning process. I'm sure after all the builds you've made and the some 300 or 400 that I've made, I'm still learning every day. I learn, I make mistakes. I find some way of doing it better and liking it. So,
and I think that's the fun of it anyway. As a woodworker, I enjoy the learning process. Yeah. So, shifting gears a little bit, again with your hat of MGB Guitar Parts and Supply founder, CEO. Uh, what are some of the things you see as trends in the community since you've been, like you said, 7 years you've been in business? What are
Mhm.
some of the trends you're seeing from your perspective?
Well, the one thing I can say, and I like to think I have a part to do with it, is I can see that the category is really taking off. There's a lot of new people getting into it all the time. I talked again to 20 customers or so a week, and a lot of them are calling me with the excitement. Hey, Mike, I just heard about this. I just saw this. I see you're online. I'd like to do this. So there's a lot of people getting interested in it. I think some of the trends that I see, and I like again to think I have a little bit to do with it. I think people are moving a little bit beyond basic stick in a box. They're kind of saying the neck needs to be a little bit nicer. So you'll see guys that are using laminations, and instead of a straight stick, they've got wings up on the headstock, and so it looks a little bit nicer. They've finished it a little bit nicer. They've shaped the back of it. It's a little bit nicer. So it's kind of moving towards more of a finished part. And then with me, and I'm offering the finished necks here with the bolt-on stuff. I mean, you can take one of my bolt-on necks and put it on a box, and it looks pretty professional and pretty nice. So I see that. Another trend that I've seen lately, and again, it's something I can relate to, is I see more and more people building six strings. Cigar boxes have mostly been over time, three strings and four strings. And of course, occasionally people would dabble in doing a six string. The requirements are much different because you got a lot more string tension. So you have to be concerned about the box has to be a little beefier. The components usually have to be a little bit different. But I have seen a lot of growth in the area of six strings, and I'm doing a lot of that now. What I call this my six string strategy that I use, and I share it with a lot of people, is that I run into because I go to a lot of music events here and bars where people are playing and stuff like that. And when I talk, I always see it's real easy to tell when you talk to a guy who's played a six string instrument all his life, and you show him a cigar box guitar. They don't have a problem with it being homemade. They don't have a problem with it being a cigar box, but they got a real big problem with it being only three strings, because most of them are thinking in their mind, there's no way I can make this sound good because I don't know how to play that. Now give me a six string and I can play it. And I've seen that happen where I've walked in to a location and said, homemade by me, cigar box guitar. It sounds pretty good. Would you try it? Oh, sure. They'll try it because it's got six strings, and that's what they've been doing for 30 or 40 years. So it's not a problem. So six strings have really come around a lot lately. And, there's a lot of boxes out there that are certainly stiff enough, rigid enough to do that. And, I'm selling a lot of parts and stuff. And a lot of our parts that have been used for 3-4 strings were actually six string parts. The pickups have been six strings, and we just make them work with 3 and 4 strings.
Yeah, and conversely, when you go to your standard uh, guitar shop in your local area, wherever you're at, and you ask them for a 3-string bridge, they look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah.
So, all right. So another question I had for you is, I think we'd be interested in knowing what you've seen in terms of the changes, or did you just hit that biggest change in the industry over the last 5-10 years? You said 7 years you've been at it. So over that time, what changes has the industry taken other than the six string interest?
Yeah. So one thing that's really interesting, and I mean, you talk about, I always share this with people. It's a reason to be encouraged that, life goes on and you're never too old to do something. I mean, imagine I'm 61 years old and I'm starting a guitar company and I don't know how to play guitar. The reason that kind of became really possible is because I had a career change 10 or 12, 15 years ago, where I went to work for a company that was an online e-commerce company. And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to it. And it's like, wow, what a change in the world and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like Amazon and Uber and all of those things. Wow, this world has changed. So that was a tool that allowed me to get into the business and do it fairly quickly, and I think do fairly well. So as far as changes, that's kind of like a two-sided coin. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of bad stuff there because with e-commerce and because of the way commerce is done today and stuff like that, the stuff I sell can be bought, a lot of it can be bought on Amazon. And Amazon, as we all know, depending on where you're located, you can order Amazon at noon when you're eating lunch and it'll be at your house by 7 that night. And so that's a little bit of my competition, and I can't do that. The other thing that's been kind of a challenge is that a lot of the economics have worked out to where Amazon or some of these other sites are actually selling stuff from Chinese suppliers. And they can't get it as quick as they can from me, but they can still get it fairly quick and at a lower price. So that my response to that is a couple of twofold. I try and come up with stuff you can't get on Amazon. There's a lot of my products you can. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. People know it. But there's a lot of stuff I make you can't get on Amazon. You'll never find it on Amazon because it's made specifically for MGB. So I have that. And then secondly, I just try and offer great service, the training videos, taking care of people, being reasonably priced, shipping it free. So I really have to be competitive, and that's a concern. I don't know where this will all end up. I think I'll keep building the brand. I'll keep working with people. I'll keep trying to have good products, good prices, and we'll see where it goes. I hope it continues to be successful for many, many more years.
You said you offer, aside from great service, videos.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about it? I think you call your videos the learning and building videos.
Yeah. So, one of the things I realized is when I kind of got into it, there was a learning process. Thank goodness there was the internet when I started, so you could find stuff. I mean, that's one of the things I'm always mindful. Again, when I look at these old instruments, these instruments that were heavy, they didn't have an internet. They didn't even have a local library. They had nothing. Maybe what they saw was somebody playing an instrument at a minstrel show or at church or something like that. So they walked home remembering what they saw. And so then they decided to make something. We have the internet. So the internet was really helpful for me. And so I've kind of carried that on to kind of say I have my own brand of videos that are from me learning the process, for me making the products to help. And so I have, it's at mgbguitars.com on YouTube. You can see them. And even on my website, there's a lot of them there. So I try and help people out with a lot of the basics. I recently did a whole new series called the Build Series, where I was talking about some newer topics and stuff like that. I should be making videos every day, but I can't. I just don't have the time. And the neat thing is there's a bunch of other guys out there who are out there telling people how to build it. So you can look on how to build a Cigar Box Guitars, and there's some guys that's all they do. Fortunately, they don't compete against me, but that's what they do. So lots of information, everything you need to know. And there's just the amount of information is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, they're great videos. I've used several of them myself to get through a few build processes. Where are your customers located? You talked about how it was an eye opener, the e-commerce, the internet business, the Amazon. Where are your customers located?
Yeah, so it's really unbelievable. It's unbelievable the amount of information that you can get in a modern e-commerce system. So I use Shopify. It's one of the more popular e-commerce sites, and I have it on my phone. I literally can run my business off of my phone. I can see everything that's happening. I can literally press a button right now, and it'll give me a picture of the globe, and it'll put pinpoints everywhere one of my customers is that's on my site. So I can tell you right now, I got 9 people on my website. I can tell you what they're doing. I can tell you how they're getting on there, whether they're using their phone, whether they're using a PC or they're using a tablet. The information is just unbelievable. Generally speaking, I would say probably 90 to 95% of my business is in the U.S. The shipping outside of the U.S. gets pretty prohibitive. So U.S. is the vast majority, and it's everywhere. I ship from every state. There's builders. There's new builders coming on every day. The internet is kind of a great equalizer, and that doesn't matter where you are. You can see, if you're in a little bitty small town in the middle of Oklahoma that has a population of 50, you can see the same thing that somebody in New York City is looking at. It's all there. You can see it all. So that's kind of cool. One thing I want to just back up and just find this is interesting. You probably have had those. You probably have entered into those discussions where you talk about what generation saw the most changes in their life. What generation? And there's some that'll go back and say, it had to be the people who saw the first man fly. Oh, it had to be the people, saw radio and TV. Oh, it had to be the people who lived through World War II. Oh, it had to be this. And man, I tell you, our generation, I look back at my life and your life because we're about the same issue. I mean, we saw, when I went to college, I couldn't use a calculator. I had to use a slide rule. I had to use a slide rule. People don't even know what that is. Then it was calculators and computers. We saw that come on. I remember my first computer in the 80s was a TRS 80 from Radio Shack. And we seen that. And then another big change that I've seen in my life because it's tied to my career was the advent of the big box retailers. That was unbelievable. And then it was the internet and all that's done and social media and all that's done. And I can tell you the biggest one is coming our way. And it's called artificial intelligence, and it's called Chat GPT. Unbelievable, unbelievable. If you've got, I'm amazed when I do that. I ask a simple question, and it's like you press the button, and the thing spins for about 2 seconds, and it comes and gives you the whole dissertation. I was asking the other day, I'm doing a little project on strings, and I said, what are the most popular strings that are used with 3-string cigar box guitars and blah, 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 blah. Press the buttons, and I got about a 3-paragraph thing, and it was like, dang, it was dead on. So it's just amazing. I don't think I'm exaggerating, but what this artificial intelligence and Chat GPT is going to do to this world is just incredible. And so I encourage people, and I run to just get on there, pick a topic, and ask a question, and say, give me 200 words on it, and you'll be shocked. The first time I did it, I was like, are they connected to my brain? Because that's what I would have said. And and I know from our careers that sometimes writing copy is the most difficult part of the job. You got to sit down and write the copy, and then you got to do this, and you got to edit it, and you got to think about it. And so you could take, 2 or 3 days to work over a little article. Man, you hit Chat GPT and it's done. You got it. It's like, wow, it's amazing. So sorry to take you on that little rabbit trail, but
it's good memories because when I joined the Navy in 1980, in intelligence, we had to use a slide rule. They didn't allow us to use the TI-35 even, so we had to learn the things we were doing with the slide.
Wasn't that amazing? Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah, had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So, I see MGB is involved in a lot of different things right now. Mm-hmm. And a lot of different projects across, the country, actually. And so what are you currently working on? And, where can we expect to see you in the coming months and year?
Yeah. So one of the things, I have this strategy, because you all know who my competitors are, and, I feel that one of my jobs is to be kind of, to the extent I can, be an ambassador of Cigar Box Guitars and to raise awareness. Now, what I realize is that a rising tide lifts all boats at the same time. So whatever I'm doing is going to help other people, and whatever they do is going to help me and stuff like that. So what I've really wanted to do, and because I have a business and because it generates an income, I'm able to reinvest into the process. And so I want to get the word out there. And you've participated in some projects with me. We've done some museums. That's what I really want to do, is get more and more public displays of our hobby out there. And we've had some success over the last few years. And we have another one that's coming up pretty soon. If I can say something good for BoxCon. That's a convention that's coming up in June in Gadsden, Alabama. And it just so happens Gadsden's just this beautiful, beautiful town. If you want to know where it is, it's go to Atlanta and go left about 2 hours and you're in Gadsden, Alabama. Beautiful place. We've made a relationship with the little art center there in town, and they've basically given us a whole museum. So a whole place to put a museum, and we put in a bunch of guitars there, and we're going to have this here. So I'm always looking for places. I opened up a museum on the other side of Florida for a while, and that was successful. So I'm just trying to get the word out and stuff like that. So just trying to spread the word on Cigar Box Guitars, and there's a lot of people getting into it, a lot of people looking at it. If you'll notice on my website, 2 additional things besides all the stuff I sell, I have I have my online museum where you can see about 80 of these instruments, these antique instruments. I also have a preferred builders program. So if you're a builder, if you're a customer and you're a builder, I can put you on that page. And then when somebody says, I want to have one, I don't want to build one, I want to buy one, it's sorted by state and city. So, there's people in there from Missouri, St. Louis. So if by chance somebody in that market says, I'd like to get one, and they go to my site and they type on Missouri and St. Louis, they'll find a bunch of builders in that area with pictures of their builds there and make a connection. So it's kind of a personal mission, but there's a business component to it. I'm trying to promote the hobby of cigar box guitar building. And it's not a fad. Mm-hmm. It's not a fad at all. Right. The first depiction was in the Civil War. And we kind of believe that the first one was built about 1850. And so, you count it, that's 180 years of people. I think 180, if my math is correct, isn't it? 180, something like that. 170, something like that.
I remember my mother saying, don't do mental math out loud.
Yeah. But anyway, they've been around for a long time, and there have been a lot of people. And again, there were people doing it on the kitchen table with a pocket knife. Now we've got lasers and CNCs and machine parts and all that kind of stuff. We're carrying on a tradition, and it will go on for a very, very long time. Because, as I say, it's as close as I can get to making music when you don't play.
Well, it's great. And Mike, I'm conscious of the fact that I've had your undivided attention for almost an hour now, and that it's later where you are than where I am. So I have two things I want to finish up with. Mm-hmm. And the first of which is, how do people get a hold of Mike Breedlove for MGB Guitars? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is just if you go to mgbguitars.com, there's email connections and there's phone connections that people call me, and I pretty much try and answer it. I think about 75% of the time I answer the calls when they come in or the emails. And it's pretty easy to say. I've done some pretty good work in the last 7 years to get my face and my name and my company out there. So if you type in Cigar Box Guitars, I'm going to somehow appear in all of that stuff. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Facebook, you want to find me on Facebook? I'm on there. You can find me on Facebook.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we get mgbguitars.com in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
And then a final question then for you. What advice would you give to a new builder that would be helpful to them just getting started?
Yeah, it goes back to an earlier comment. Just keep your expectations in line. Don't go thinking you're going to build a Les Paul out of the box. Keep your expectations in line. Be prepared to do some experimentation. Be prepared to build, analyze, build, improve, build, and just keep that process going. And also keep your expectations low. I mean, I get a lot of people that build their first one and they say, oh, I want to put in 3 pickups and I want to have a 5-way switch and I want to do this and I want to. How about just 1 pickup? Just do 1 pickup, 1 volume, 1 tone. That's it. And then you can build upon that process as you go on. So keep it simple and be prepared to build a lot of them. Be prepared to have a lot of fun and, encourage others to jump on with you and attend events. There are cigar box festivals all over the country. There's the one we're doing in Alabama in June. There's a St. Louis festival coming up in June. There's a one in North Carolina in June. If you get connected on Facebook and you hit the groups, you'll find out where all of those activities are. And there's one thing's for sure, there's a lot of very, very helpful people. There's a lot of artists that you can walk into a show with your very first one, and they'll be kind enough to say, let me play it for you. And that is where the real excitement comes in. And I'll remember the first time Steve Harvey played one of my guitars. It was like, wow. Justin Johnson played one. It was wow. So that's always a fun thing to do. And you can do it. You can easily do it. Just follow the rules.
Just follow the rules. Well, I got something to say on that one too, but I'm grateful for your time. I've
Sure.
really enjoyed our conversation, and I think that's probably a good place to close.
Yeah.
And so, as I always sign off, I'll say thanks for joining me on this episode of the Suitcase Sessions. And to our listeners, if you're enjoying the show, why not hit the subscribe button and follow us each week as we continue to explore the world of cigar box guitars. And until then, remember, there are no rules. Just keep playing, and we'll catch up later somewhere down the road.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.